Hi Aries, and welcome to your August 2024 horoscope. One of the biggest events of the month of August is the square between Jupiter and Saturn. And even though the actual square is happening a little bit later in the month, you will still feel this energy building up all the way from the beginning of the month. And honestly, no matter what else is happening during the month, the square will be sort of like the foundation or the underground of everything else that is happening within the month. This is also because the faster moving planet like Mars and Venus are going to, every once in a while, highlight this square by making an aspect with either Jupiter or Saturn themselves. And keep in mind that whenever they do this, they are also, in a large sense of this, bringing up the tension that is there between Jupiter and Saturn. So because this square is such a prominent part in August, this is why I wanted to begin with this square, talking about this square in this horoscope, even though it's happening later in the month. The square happens on the 19th of August, and if it couldn't get any worse, it actually happens on a full moon as well. So this means that the energy of the square will also be much more amplified because the sun and the moon will be opposing each other as well. So we'll cover the full moon in just a second, but let's talk about that square first. The square means there is some tension between Saturn, pessimism, and Jupiter, optimism. It's almost like there's a sort of arm wrestle between the two. Sometimes one is winning and sometimes the other. This is also the arm wrestle between being hopeful, which is the planet of Jupiter, and being realistic, which is the planet of Saturn. And honestly, it really depends on what's happening with these two planets in your own birth chart, how you carry each of these energies. That has a really huge impact on how this tension is going to play out for you specifically. If you're somebody that's usually more on the realistic or pessimistic side, you might find that this month is really asking of you to try to go a little bit further into the direction of being optimistic and being hopeful. However, if you find yourself usually being on the side of being optimistic and hopeful, you might find that this month is maybe bringing you down a step and asking you to be a bit more realistic. And your optimism and your joy has a bit of a damper on it because of that Saturn. And for you, Aries, Saturn is in your 12th house, while Jupiter is in your 3rd house. And for you specifically, this tension might carry out between this part of you that wants to stay home, that wants to be alone, that wants to be within your own cocoon, versus this other part of you that wants to go out into the local community, spend time with the people close to you, like your neighbors or your siblings, to travel, to input different information or happenings within your community. So you might especially feel the tension between those two. And you might also especially feel the tension between how sometimes being alone or in your own cocoon can feel a little bit more of a low energy or a little bit more restrictive, whereas when you go out and spend time with the local community, you tend to get a bit more energy, a bit more hopefulness, and a bit more optimism. So remember, earlier in the horoscope, I shared that we will be feeling these themes way before the 19th of August, when the actual square is happening. So all the way up to the week before, you might start to see these themes come up, but especially August 14th and 15th is an important part of this story as well. This is because on the 14th and 15th, Mars conjuncts Jupiter and squares Saturn. So Mars touching these two planets, you might feel that perhaps this is sort of like the spark that lights the fire. And this might be happening around those 2 dates, not March, August 14th or 15th. The day right before the square, Venus will oppose Saturn and square Jupiter. This might also feel quite intense. It might be sort of like the second spark that adds to the fire that's gonna sort of become full on the 19th. And because for you, Venus is opposing Saturn from the 6th house, you might see your health and your routine come into this whole conversation as well. So you might find that because you don't have a stable routine, you struggle with these feelings of sometimes feeling optimistic and sometimes feeling a bit more realistic or even pessimistic. And you might especially see how your routine plays a role into that. But especially as we zoom out and take a look at this whole week, we start off with Mars conjuncting Jupiter. You feel courageous. You feel like you're going to act on your optimism and do something bold because you're feeling like, yes, this is going to go well. I can feel it. I'm optimistic about this working out. However, as soon as Mars conjuncts Jupiter, right away, it also squares Saturn. So it's like you're going to take this action, you're going to take this step fueled by your optimism, but it might not result in the outcome that you wanted to, because Saturn is there to sort of put a stop to it. So you might be acting quite courageously, but the outcome is not as expected. Later in the week, when Venus opposes Saturn, you remember Venus represents our self-esteem, and for you, it's in your house of routine. You might feel that what happened, the restriction that Saturn puts on your courageous actions, is also putting a damper on your self-esteem, your self-confidence, making it a bit more difficult for you to believe in yourself, to feel optimistic and to have high hopes. And then finally, we get to that day of the square between Jupiter and Saturn. And if you remember earlier in the horoscope, I also mentioned that we have a full moon during the square. This full moon is happening in Aquarius. So it means the sun is in Leo and the moon is in Aquarius. For you specifically, Aries, this full moon happens in your 11th house of friends and community. So you might find that this restriction from Saturn, this effect it has on your self-esteem and your self-confidence, is also making it a little bit more difficult for you to relate to your community, to feel these feelings of belonging in that community. You might really feel like an outcast, which again, the moon is in the sign of Aquarius. Sometimes we can feel like outcasts or like we're really different from everybody else. So the pessimism, the lower energy that Saturn is bringing to you, Aries, this month might especially bring up these feelings of not belonging within your community of friends. Sorry to let you know, but your self-esteem, honestly, all of our self-esteem might be a little bit more on the lower end this month. And this is because Venus has quite a few difficult aspects all throughout the month of August. At the beginning of the month, Venus squares Uranus, which is the planet of surprises, the planet of sudden changes. And then at the end of the month, Venus opposes Neptune, which is the planet of our dreams. So the way this could manifest for you specifically, Aries, is that the square with Uranus might be some surprises from your finances that are taking a hit on your self-esteem, that are making you feel a little bit less confident in yourself. And towards the end of the month, when Venus opposes Neptune, you might feel like certain dreams that you've had about your life are not coming through, or you feel like they're taking a bit long. Again, Saturn is really prominent this month. You might feel like you're hitting a wall with them, and that might also bring up more of a hit to your self-esteem and your self-confidence. So those were sort of the major events of the month of August. But before we close off this horoscope, we cannot forget to talk about the new moon that we also have earlier in the month. On August 4th, there will be a new moon in Leo, which will be happening in your 5th house. And you'll be happy to know that this is a fairly gentle, a fairly calm new moon. And honestly, we all deserve it because we have all the chaos happening later in the month. While the sun and the moon are in the sign of Leo, which is very much focused on recognition, feeling amazing because others give us compliments or others really recognize us. And at the same time, because during this new moon, Mars and Jupiter are in the sign of Gemini, there might be more of this curiosity, a lot of this active energy. I do want to caution you against overdoing it during this new moon, both with Leo, which can get quite performative, and Gemini, which loves to do 1,000 things at once. Just be careful that this energy might become a lot in a good way, but it might still feel like you're overextending or you're overperforming for others and losing touch with what it is that you truly want. And honestly, because this new moon is happening in your 5th house, especially for you, Aries, you might find yourself indulging in the pleasures of life. You might be getting invited to a lot of parties. You might be getting a lot of pleasure, perhaps hanging out with your children. All of those wonderful feelings of fun and enjoyment. And I would just say, please enjoy it. I think all of us could use a little bit of fun earlier in the month of August before we head into that Jupiter and Saturn square. So overall, Aries, this is your August horoscope. This is what August has in store for you. So overall, you might be struggling with this idea of optimism versus pessimism, this feeling of hope versus, what's the opposite of hope? Unhopeful, feeling a little bit down in your energy. And for you specifically, you might find that these feelings come up depending on whether you spend time alone or whether you spend time with people. And you might find yourself really jumping drastically between the two. Because again, this is a square, so we're talking about a lot of tension. It's not something that you can ignore. The feelings will really be a black and white contrast. Feeling super disenergized when you're alone and feeling super energized when you're with others. And that contrast will be so big that it will be very difficult for you not to notice it. But overall, Aries, I believe in you. You got this month. I know that you are a fighter and you have all the power within you. You know, I always give this as a piece of advice whenever we head into a bit more challenging astrology territory is, just let things happen. Try to be present, try to notice what's happening, what's coming up. And, later when those energies feel a little bit more calm and you feel a bit more centered, to take time to reflect, to take time to try and see what was happening, if there was any lessons to take away from the whole experience. So Aries, I hope even amongst all of this craziness of August, you do still find some time to enjoy the month. Thank you so much for joining me for this horoscope. And don't forget, when we reach 1,000 subscribers, I'm giving one of you a free reading. So if you want to make sure that you enter into the giveaway, then make sure you press the subscribe button. Thanks, Aries, and I hope to see you again soon.